picking up from what Ivan and the discussion he put together, the previous session, and whatever you've seen in Seoul during the last week, what are some of the key messages you take back? What are some of the key lessons you take back on what you think your city can do? One or two big things that you take back? Anyone?
The institutional arrangements.
Seoul has no institutional arrangement. What did you see in Seoul that was attractive to you?
Sir,
Karanjit.
improve the pedestrian walkways and proper parking, which are presently occupying the main place.
Improve walkways and improve parking. Don't put parking on the pedestrian walkway. What else?
Integration of different modes of transport.
Integration of different modes of transport.
Yes, coordination also, because there's a Seoul metropolitan government, also the Seoul city government. It's like, it seems to be that they are very well coordinated.
Seoul city government and Seoul metropolitan.
What stays in my mind is Chengi's experience.
No, what is the lesson you are taking back from Seoul?
The policy can do that, how it was before and how it is now.
So, what Seoul did to improve itself over time?
Dedicated budgeting. Dedicated source of funding.
Dedicated source of funding.
Also the use of technology.
Dedicated source of funding which came from
30%
fuel tax.
I think my impression in Seoul is, in order to successful in the public transportation reform, we need the strong leadership, best team, and interactive approach, and all people working together. That's the most critical.
So, strong leadership. Now, all these suggestions that have been given, think back of your city, think back in your city's situation.
Almost every city has this problem, but Seoul has attempted to change it.
Seoul has attempted to change it. Okay. Now, think of when you go back to your city, these are some of the things that you've seen, and you need to get this done. Who will do it? All of us talk in the evenings about, how this should be done, that should be done. So many things that we keep coming, talking to others, thinking in our minds. Have we thought of who should do it? Delhi. Who should do it?
We should start talking about it, getting people to hear about it, then things might start changing.
Yes.
Who should do it?
People like us that are with the
People like us. Can you do it on your own?
Yes, no, but
leadership.
there should
At
be
least
some.
we can prepare a proposal and submit to the authorities who matter. Till it is
Who? Who is that? Who are the authorities who matter? Can you get it done through authorities? Think about it. Think about it. One of the things that you said is the strong coordination between modes. Can you get that kind of a thing done through authorities? Or do you need an authority? A lot of us talk about what should be done. We never think, who's to do it? You and I can't do it. You and I represent one part of that fragmented institutional structure. We don't represent the entirety. In Delhi, Taj is heading the traffic police. How much can he do? This is the thing to think about. This is where we get into this whole base of institutions. And I keep saying, all this needs two things. You need the right institution, and you need the right capacity within that institution. And the capacity is not just the human mind, but the financial resources. I think in the previous session there was also a mention about it's not the individual that's very important, it's the legal backing that is important. I would put an additional factor, legal backing and the money to show your strength. If you don't have the money, but you have the legal authority, nobody will listen to you. But if you have the money to disburse, even without the legal authority, people will come to you. So the financial strength and the dedicated source of funding which gives you the money is the most important. Now, I've given you the end of the murder mystery, who committed the murder. Let me go back to the rest of the story. Okay? Very quickly, we'll discuss some more. Are these problems? Tell me, is this a problem? It's not a problem. Or shall we say, is this the problem?
Symptom of a problem. It's a symptom of
It's the manifestation of a problem, or the symptom of a problem, right? What is the problem then?
There will be many. For this symptom, there will be many underlying problems.
People are getting richer, they can all afford to buy cars, cars are getting cheaper, more people are coming into cities, public transport is not as effective as it could be. Those are the problems. Now, can you solve the problem by simply saying we'll build more roads? What did we do in many cities? We saw this problem, we found junctions are very crowded. So simple answer was build a flyover. Right? We started that way. What happened when we built a flyover? Well, this is not just cars but also motorbikes, and for friends from Vietnam, this is pictures from there. But when we built a flyover, no, let me go past this. These are some of the other associated problems. So if this was the problem, we built a flyover and this is what we got. Can we solve it by widening roads? Oh, it's very crowded, let's build more road, let's widen the road. Or Sam showed some pictures of road, over road, over road, over road. Does it help?
Which place is that?
This is China, Beijing.
No, this one.
No, this is just a picture from. Yeah. But it's not that there is no place like that. You go to Los Angeles, you'll find places like this. You go to Moscow, you'll find, I've seen roads with 16 lanes in Moscow. So it's not that you don't have things like this. This particular one is a little, you are staying here and your friend is staying at the other end and you have a 16-lane road in the middle. So this divides the city. So what we generally say is you cannot build your way out of congestion. That's why I say that if you have people who think that, building facilities, spending money on brick and mortar, you can solve the congestion problem. No. Beijing has how many kilometers, Sam? 400 kilometers of metro. They have more than 20,000 buses. And they have a fifth ring road. The way they are going, you can probably go from Shanghai to Moscow on one of Beijing's ring roads. But you can't solve the problem by just building facilities. Why is that? Urban transport is very complex. There are many dimensions to this. One of the strongest dimensions is the linkage between transport and land use. You have linkages with environment, linkages with energy, linkages with how people behave. You build a metro line which is half a kilometer or 1 kilometer from my house, it may be the greatest metro in the world, but if I can't get to that metro station, I won't take it. And believe me, the problem is a lot more acute in cities where you have a predominance of motorbikes. Because I can park my motorbike next to my bed and next to my office table. In traffic, it is the fastest mode of travel. And if you do some calculations of the fuel price, you will find it is cheaper than a bus. The marginal cost of using a motorbike is less than the cost of using a bus. So getting people to move from the motorbike to public transport means design elements which go far beyond just building an excellent metro. You need to do many more things than that. Okay, so it is this complexity that means how do you bring multiple dimensions to be thought through by a single institution? And this is what makes setting up an institution complex. Okay? So it needs a holistic approach. You need to balance supply side measures. That means building metro, widening road, building flyovers, putting more buses. These are supply side measures with demand side measures. What are demand side measures? How do you restrain people from using their personal vehicles? What has Seoul done on that? What are the demand side measures in Seoul? How are they trying to persuade people not to use their vehicles? How?
Moving their office location, polycentric consign.
Prices of high fuel prices.
One more, very important. Fuel tax.
Fuel tax, parking tax.
One of the highest fuel prices. Those who did Cairo, what was the price of fuel in Cairo? 15 cents a liter. Here, about $1.7 a liter. So it's a way by which you try to persuade people not to use their cars. That is a demand side measure. But at the same time, you've put in such a beautiful public transport system, so well integrated, that is the supply side measure. So these two need to come together. So who would take charge of the supply side measures and who would take charge of the demand side measures? Typically, there are multiple institutions. Each one works on their own. Believe me, I have seen this happening in Delhi. The metro was being built to Gurgaon from one side. The road on the other side was being widened and you were having, long viaducts where with no intersection, nothing, you'll go straight into Gurgaon. Where is the linkage? If you want to provide the metro on one side, why do you want to provide this expressway on the other side? But two different agencies, each had to build their own facilities. It happened. Because there is this multiplicity of institutions that do different things, but they need to be done in a coordinated manner. This is really the case, or what I call the institutional challenge. People have said urban transport is an institutional orphan. There is no father or mother. Everyone is involved, and many ways marginally. Huh?
Everyone is a stepmother or a stepfather.
That's the problem. And this is just the listing I've put of the agencies responsible for transport in Delhi. When we give you this printout, you can take a look. You will find some are missing. You may not find any of them which is not relevant, but it's probably not a full list. That's why it is essential to integrate this, and this is the case for setting up some institution which can take charge of urban transport in a comprehensive manner. Take a complete charge of setting up this institution, right? Okay. Any comments on this so far? Before we go to what do you think of doing when you set up these institutions? Any comments?
Problem actually, sir, even if it depends upon like in daily circumstances. There is an institution already been established in which the Lieutenant Governor is the chairman. It's called UTP, United Traffic and Technological Integration Center. But the problem here is the members, in Delhi's case, the members are PWD, Pollution Control, Delhi Police, Municipal Corporation. Now, as of now, LG has no power over anyone else except Delhi Police and DEA. PWD is not under it, Pollution Control Board is not under it, municipal corporations are also practically not under it. So even if he says to the PWD, get it done like these many months, these are the priorities, it doesn't get executed.
So it's all an attempt to coordinate supply side measures,
Supply side.
right?
No, even for demand side also, like planning. The job is basically to plan where the next flyover will be made, whether the flyover is required or not, what would be the road engineering, what would be the calming measures. Even that, since it doesn't have a direct authority, that punitive or rewarding authority, others they don't do.
I would call all of these also supply side measures. If you take demand side measures, think of how much control does he have on parking or the fee to be charged for parking. How much control does he have on the tax on fuel? So effectively, it's an attempt to coordinate supply side measures, what to build, where to build, when to build. But there is no demand side coming in. There is not much by way of these taxes. Maybe on land use planning, there is some influence. Any other comment? Does anyone dispute the need for an authority like this? Anyone who feels it's not required? Everyone agree? Great. Now let's move ahead. We all agree that we need this. How do we set it up? I would say setting it up also has two phases. The first phase is to issue that order or act or whatever you call it, saying that this authority is set up. To my mind, this needs no money. It needs a consensus and it needs a piece of paper produced as a result of that. It doesn't need money. You may need money to have a few workshops, get a few people, get a few retreats, maybe send a few people to some countries to see what they have done, but it's small money. The second challenge is once it's set up, once that paper has been produced, how to give this institution flesh and blood. How to find that person who will head it. How to give him that money. How to give it visibility. At this stage, I don't want to go into that because of time constraints. Let me cover a few aspects of producing that paper. What are the things you need to think about in producing that paper which establishes the authority? Okay, let me. First thing is, okay, what is it that government needs to do? What are the things that government needs to do? When we set up the authority, we need to give it certain functions. So we need to think of what is it that we want this authority to do. I'll say one is strategic functions. That means higher level functions where you think of long-term planning. What is our vision for the city? What are the kinds of things we'll do in the next 15 or 20 years? That is a strategic function. At a second level, I've put three of them: infrastructure planning, regulation, and service planning. I'll go to the details of each of them. At a third level, You have the infrastructure construction and maintenance, that is the actual operational level. And then you have public transport services. Public transport, again, I have divided into two components: common facilities and separate services. Now let's go to what each of them is. Strategic level, this is what is called the tactical level. This is what you can call the operational level. Okay, what are each of these? This, as I said, formulating a policy, establishing a vision. This is long term, 15, 20, 25 years, what you want your city to become. This is planning for your roads, bridges, infrastructure, parking. That is infrastructure planning. Regulation, I would say, are typically functions that need to be performed under law. Law requires you to ensure that a person who drives must have a driving license. A bus that operates on a route must have a permit. Fares for public transport are prescribed by government. So these are functions assigned to government by law. That is a function of regulation. The primary focus is it should be safe and it should be equitable, which means buses should be available to everybody and buses should not overcharge. In one of the earlier discussions, there was some question about why can't you have market principles and let buses run wherever they want? Let it be a market-based public transport service. I think this came up in one of the earlier sessions. My answer is, the private sector wants to run buses where they get money. But government has something called a universal service obligation, which means government has a responsibility to make sure that everyone can get a bus when they want it. So if you have a new settlement that is coming up somewhere, you don't have enough demand from there, government has an obligation to provide public transport to them, but the private sector may not want to go. This is where regulation comes in. You can require the private sector to go there, but you say we will pay you a subsidy. So this is the regulatory function of safety and equity. Service planning, these are not functions that are required under law, but these are functions that you need to perform if you want a good service. So you must design a network. You must find out how many buses should go on which route, what is the demand on each route, how many buses on which route. That's the kind of service planning function. What time to what time, at what frequency. These are all service planning functions. Infrastructure planning, this is the actual construction of roads, bridges, parking. Public transport, common facilities are facilities that are common to multiple operators. So you may have a terminal where people change from the metro to the bus. You may have a terminal where people change from one bus to another bus, and these two buses may be operated by different operators. Your T-Money card, is this a common facility? It can be used on the metro, it can be used on the bus, it can be used on any mode, it can be used on the taxi. So a whole lot of common facilities which are best done by someone independent of individual operators. And then you have the separate services which are metro, BRT, buses, taxis, whatever it is. So this is a kind of framework of functions that needs to be performed by a public entity. And this is what you need to keep in mind when you decide what this authority that you are planning to set up should do. Moving forward, to my mind, strategic functions are done at high levels in the government. they are not done at operational levels. These functions can be performed typically by agencies under the government. And these functions can be done either in the public sector or in the private sector, depending on what your industry structure is or what your governance philosophy is. Okay? Just keep this at the back of your mind. When we go further, this will be useful. Some of the key issues that you need to think up in producing this paper are: what is the legal basis of this institution? We'll come to a little more on this. What will it be? What will its jurisdiction be? What is the area it will cover? What functions will it perform? What will it be its management structure and accountability? What will be the leadership of the institution? And the financing. Let me quickly go through each of these. Legal basis, it could be under its own legislation. So in London, you have a Greater London Act. I'll draw on examples from 3 or 4 cities just to give you an idea. It can have its own legislation. It could be set up under some generic legislation. In Indore, one of the cities in India, they have something called the Indore City Transport Services Limited. It has been set up under something called the Companies Act. So it is a generic legislation for setting up any commercial entity. And ICTSL has been set up under that. It could be under executive orders. No law is required, there are executive orders. Many cities in India are trying to set up the Unified Metropolitan Transport Authorities, or UMTA, under executive orders. And you have cases where it has been set up through mutual agreement. So you have examples of 3 cities, relatively small. They are close to each other. The mayors of the 3 cities have come together and agreed that between us, let there be a common authority. So it is through mutual agreement. These are 4 examples that we've come across on how these authorities are set up and what is the legal basis for them. What will be needed in your case will really depend on your situation. You can't copy any of them. You have to look at what is most relevant in your case. Looking at jurisdiction, it could be a single city, it could be 2 or more cities, it could be in Seoul. It is Seoul City, Incheon City, and something called the Gyeonggi Province. In London, it's a Greater London area. In Lagos, what did we see? It is the Lagos metropolitan area. In France, or Paris, you have something called STIF, S-T-I-F, it's the Syndicate Transport Île-de-France for the Paris region. It covers a jurisdiction of more than 1,200 municipalities. But that is because in the French system, each municipality is very small. Now, for a very small area, you can think of local roads, you can think of parking being done by the municipality. But when it comes to a metro system or a mass transit system, it must cover a larger jurisdiction. So, more than 1,200 small municipalities have come together to set up STIF. In some cases, it's the entire metropolitan region. So, these are the variations. You have to think in your context, what should be the jurisdiction of the authority I set up? It really depends on people's travel patterns. Do people travel very frequently from one municipal area to another municipal area? If they do, it would make sense to make the jurisdiction covering all those areas. If it doesn't, then keep it as one. So again, depends on the local situation. But jurisdiction is something you need to think about. Functions. Main question, is it only public transport or is it more than just public transport? Is it only planning, regulating and providing, or does it also include operations? And there are certain places where in London, well, we'll go to that, we'll come to that. Then if it's also got a responsibility for operations, will it operate on its own or will it operate through subsidiaries? In Paris, what STIF does is this part of the work. So what is left out? Basically, its role is largely limited to public transport, strategic planning and public transport. It does not go into roads and bridges or parking. And it does not get into any kind of operations. So more at a planning level. In London, can you see the difference? So it is not just public transport, it goes into the entire range of strategic and tactical functions, and it also provides common facilities. The actual operation of the London Metro, or the London Underground as they call it, is done by a subsidiary of Transport for London. TfL is Transport for London. That is the authority responsible for transport. So a subsidiary runs the metro system. Buses are contracted to private operators. It's more or less similar to the situation in Seoul. In Seoul, you have buses contracted to the private sector. You have 4 lines of the metro operated by one public company, another 4 lines operated by another public company, that is SMRT that we went to, and you have a 9th line where they are now trying public-private partnership. So it's a variation. Vancouver, again very similar to London. Singapore, again very similar to London. The difference in Singapore is both the metro and the buses are given to the private sector to operate. So the public entity, the Land Transport Authority, they build it, but they contract the operations to the private sector. What did you see in Lagos? And what is happening with UMTAs in India? Wherever, whichever city has set up the UMTA, it's primarily focusing on strategic functions at this point of time. Okay? Now, what is the management structure? Typically, most of these institutions, they have a board. That board is the authority. So board has very senior level people. It could be headed by the mayor, as in London. It could be headed by various other very senior people. In Lagos, it's apparently the governor or someone nominated by the governor. But that board is the authority. The UMTAs in India, you have the chief secretary of the state, who's the head of that. But they are typically supported by a secretariat, a technical secretariat headed by a CEO. That is generally the management structure. Leadership. This can be tricky. Many places we've seen this is tricky. Nairobi, who's from Kenya? Kenya. Is there a problem? At least the one meeting that I was there, I found that there are 3 governorates which are involved, the 3 governors which are involved in the jurisdiction of the Nairobi metropolitan area. They don't want the governor of Nairobi to head it. They're willing to take anyone else. So this can become tricky when there are multiple jurisdictions. If you think of the India example, if you want to think of a larger metropolitan area for Delhi, which is called the National Capital Region, you will have at least 3 provinces which come in. Now, will they be willing to accept Delhi's leadership? That's the kind of problem that tends to come up, and this is tricky. You have to resolve that through local politics, local negotiation. There's no textbook answer to that. Finally, financing, in my view, the most important. You have it, give it the money, people will come. If it doesn't have the money, no one will bother. How you find the money for it? There are many ways in which some of these institutions have, acquired money. In Bangalore, in fact, that's one of the questions that comes up. It has no money. The UMTA has no money. But the UMTA has the finance secretary. So every time a proposal goes to the finance department for releasing money, a question he could ask is, has this been agreed to in the UMTA? If not, first go back to them. There are problems with the UMTA which I don't need to go through, but main thing is they don't meet. But if they do, to my mind, is not a bad way to start. What are the key lessons that you get from this? There is no universally correct model. You've seen London, Paris, Vancouver, Singapore. There are variations. You need to think of what is most suitable in your case. The variations are generally in terms of what kind of legal backing, what is the jurisdiction, who are the members, how do they get the finance. A lot of these things vary. But most have a board structure and a technical secretariat supporting them. There could be finance through government grants as well as certain dedicated funds. In Seoul, you have the fuel tax. In France, you have something called an employment tax that gives it huge money. So anyone who employs more than 7 people is required to pay a percentage of the wage bill to the authority, to STIF. And STIF uses that money for financing its transport needs. So financial strength extremely important. Many of these institutions take time to evolve. Just setting up the paper doesn't mean you've got the best structure. That's the starting point. It takes time before it reaches. London started in 1933. And it is only in 2000 the Transport for London finally came. In Vancouver, you have TransLink. They started in 1938 through various means of trying to coordinate disparate services. It's only, again, 1999 or something that TransLink got set up. Same thing in Paris. Somewhere in the 1930s they started. So it takes time. You won't get the first thing on the very first day, but begin. And I personally feel that an attempt to bring multiple stakeholders to a single table and at least let's talk across the table is not a bad way to begin. But that should happen. When you set up a new body, the first thing is people should know it's there. Just because it's established, people won't know. They need to know it's there. And for it to become visible, you need to take certain actions, or certain things that it should do. How many people in Delhi know there is something called UTP? I came to find out all of a sudden. I didn't know. Give it something which gives it visibility. What is it that you had in Lamata? What is that thing that you had in Lamata which gave it visibility to begin with? Repair of roads. What else before that? You had a whole BRT project, a World Bank funded BRT project. something like this which gives it visibility, something on which it can place a foot and say, this is mine, and then try to reach out with the other foot. If you don't have it a place to stand, it won't last. This is what I had to say, but I think these are some of the things we need to try and discuss and think about. Some of the issues that become important in setting up the institution. But before we end, let me leave you with one thought. Just one thought to think about. You see, we all keep talking about champions. Everyone has said champions, you need a champion. Where does the champion come from? The question I ask is the champion born or is he made? Think about it. Maybe Taj can think of writing a book on are they made or born. But to me, I think it's a big debate. I don't know. But we all talk about champions. Where do you get them? They don't get produced in a factory. So are they produced by God, built in when they were born? Or can something be done by someone to make such champions? Okay? Well, thank you very much. Thank you.